The trap of always explaining yourself. Have you noticed it? Every time you decline an invitation, you automatically attach a reason. Every time you make a choice that goes against the crowd, you rush to justify it before anyone even asks. As if every decision you make needs a trial before it can be approved. As if your life were a case file, and you were the one constantly building your own defense. Marcus Aurelius, even as Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, never lived this way. In his private journal, the collection we now call Meditations, he reminded himself that time is wasted trying to account for everything you do, instead of simply doing what is right and moving on. He wrote it not for an audience, not for approval, but as a private note to himself, because even an emperor felt the pull to over-explain. Think about that for a moment. A man with armies, senators, and an empire answering to him still had to remind himself not to seek validation. If someone with that much power felt the need to check himself, imagine how much stronger that pull is for the rest of us, people without armies, without thrones, just trying to get through a Tuesday without being misunderstood. You don't owe anyone a full report. You don't need a committee to approve how you live your one life. But why do we keep explaining anyway? Because we're afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid that without a clear reason attached, people will assume the worst about us. That fear is the chain. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you explain, the more you hand over the authority to judge your life to someone else. Every unnecessary explanation is a small transfer of power from you to them. The Stoics understood something simple but radical for their time and ours. That authority was never meant to belong to anyone but you, not your job. Epictetus was born into slavery. He lived most of his early life owned by another man, his body controlled, his movements dictated by someone else's will. And yet, out of that condition, he built one of the most liberating ideas in the history of philosophy, a principle so simple it can reshape how you live. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. Your actions are within your control. Your effort, your values, your choices, these are yours. But how someone else interprets those actions, completely outside your control. Their opinion, their judgment, their gossip, none of it belongs to you, and none of it was ever yours to manage. So, when you try to explain yourself over and over, hoping to change how someone thinks of you, what are you actually doing? You're trying to control the uncontrollable. It's a battle with no finish line, because someone else's mind was never your territory to govern, no matter how badly you want it to be. Picture this. You quit a stable, well-paying job to chase something you actually believe in. Some people will call it reckless, others will call it brave. Your mother might worry. A stranger online might mock you. You cannot control which label they choose, no matter how carefully you explain your reasoning, no matter how many times you lay out your 5-year plan. But you have complete control over one thing, whether you show up and follow through on that decision day after day, regardless of what anyone calls it. This is why Epictetus taught his students to separate the world into two piles, what's up to us and what's not up to us. Peace begins the moment you stop trying to manage the second pile. To stop explaining isn't coldness, and it isn't arrogance. It's simply drawing a clear, honest line between what belongs to you and what never did. Strong people don't need an audience. There's a story about Cato the Younger, a Roman statesman known for his unshakable integrity. Mocked publicly in the middle of the forum, insulted in front of citizens, senators, and rivals, he didn't respond. He didn't raise his voice, didn't offer a rebuttal, didn't even pause his work to acknowledge the insult. He simply kept doing what he was doing, as if the words had landed on someone else entirely. When people later asked why he stayed silent in the face of such public humiliation, His answer was simple. If he stopped to answer every insult thrown his way, he would have no time left to actually live his life. Every reply would cost him a piece of his day, a piece of his peace, a piece of himself. Most people misunderstand silence. They assume it means weakness, that the silent person has nothing to say, no defense to offer, nothing worth contributing. But silence in the face of something unworthy of a response is one of the rarest and most difficult forms of strength a person can develop. It takes far more restraint to stay quiet than to fire back. Strong people don't narrate themselves for every scrutinizing glance that passes their way. They don't need a nodding, applauding audience to keep moving forward with their plans. Real confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need outside confirmation to feel valid. It simply stands on its own actions, steady, whether anyone is watching or not. If you still feel a persistent need to justify yourself under every judgmental look, every raised eyebrow, every skeptical comment from a coworker or relative, it might be worth asking, what part of me is still waiting for someone else's permission to live my own life? Explaining is a form of begging. Look closer at the motive hiding behind most explanations. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Most of the time, we don't explain ourselves to clarify the truth. We explain because, deep down, we want approval. We want the other person to nod, to say, "That makes sense," to release us from the discomfort of being misunderstood. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius in the letters we now know as Letters from a Stoic, warned repeatedly about the danger of living according to the opinions of the crowd. He observed that when a person becomes too consumed with what others think of them, they slowly lose the ability to know who they actually are underneath all that performance. The self gets buried beneath layer after layer of managed impressions. Modern psychology actually echoes this ancient warning. Researchers studying social validation have found that constantly seeking approval from others can quietly erode a person's internal sense of identity. The more you outsource your self-worth to other people's reactions, the less grounded you become in your own values. The Stoics arrived at this same conclusion 2,000 years earlier, simply through hard-won observation of human nature. So here's a useful test. Every time you catch yourself saying, "I did this because," pause and ask, am I clarifying the truth here, or am I quietly begging for agreement? The difference is subtle, but it matters enormously. Clarifying the truth is sharing information once, calmly, and then letting it go, regardless of how it's received. Begging for agreement looks different. It's repeating, embellishing, adding new angles and softer wording, circling back again and again, until the other person finally gives you the nod you were waiting for. If you notice yourself repeating the same reason to someone for the third or fourth time, it's rarely because they still don't understand. It's usually because you haven't felt settled yet. And that's the moment to stop talking. The peace you're chasing was never sitting in someone else's approval. It was always available in your own trust of your own decision, the cost of living to please. There's a paradox that most people discover far too late in life. The harder you try to please everyone around you, the fewer people you actually end up pleasing, and the less of yourself you have left standing at the end of it. Why does this happen? Because every explanation, every justification, every carefully worded defense is a small piece of you bent and reshaped to fit someone else's expectations. Do this occasionally, with one person, in one moment, and it's harmless, even kind. But do this constantly, with everyone, in every situation, and you slowly lose your original shape. You become a composite of everyone else's preferences, with very little of you left in the mixture. Epictetus taught something that sounds almost harsh at first listen. If you want to improve as a person, you must be willing to appear foolish or ignorant in matters that are outside your control. Don't wish to be seen as someone who knows everything, who has an airtight answer for every choice. And if people start to think you're especially important or impressive, he warned, be suspicious of yourself, because chasing that image often means quietly abandoning your own judgment in favor of theirs. This isn't a call to be careless or dismissive of others. It's a recognition that trying to be universally liked is, in itself, a losing game with no final score to reach. There will always be one more person to convince, one more critic to silence, one more explanation to offer. In other words, accepting that not everyone will understand you, not everyone will agree with your choices, and some people will simply never come around. That's a small price to pay for something far greater. The alternative, a life spent perpetually explaining, adjusting, and performing, costs you the one thing you can never buy back, the years spent actually being yourself. How to practice deliberate silence. So how does all of this translate into an ordinary Tuesday? Philosophy is only useful if it survives contact with real life. The awkward family dinner, the group chat, the co-worker who keeps asking, "But why though?" First, practice pausing half a second before blurting out an explanation. That tiny pause is often enough to ask yourself a simple question. Does this person actually need an explanation right now, or am I just reacting out of a habitual fear of disapproval? Half a second sounds small, but it's often the exact gap where a reflex turns into a genuine choice. Second, learn to tell the difference between sharing and justifying. When you tell a close friend about a decision you made quietly, without urgency, that's sharing. It comes from trust, from wanting connection, not from fear. But when you feel real pressure to prove you're right to a stranger, an acquaintance, or someone who seems to judge you no matter what you say, that's justifying. And more often than not, it's simply unnecessary. Third, let your actions speak louder than your words ever could. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, in one of his more pointed journal entries, not to waste the rest of his life speculating about what other people think, say, or plan, unless doing so served some larger, shared good. Use that same energy to actually live, instead of narrating a defense for the way you live. Finally, and perhaps hardest of all, allow people to think the wrong thing about you for a while. Let the misunderstanding sit there, uncorrected, at least for a time. This is genuinely difficult. Our instinct screams to correct the record immediately. But it is one of the strongest exercises in self-command a person can practice, repeated day after day, until it starts to feel less like a threat and more like freedom. Freedom that needs no permission. There's something the Stoics understood with striking clarity, something that still holds up 2,000 years later. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want, whenever you want, without consequence. Real freedom is no longer being bound by the constant need to prove yourself right in someone else's eyes. When you stop over-explaining, you don't become distant or cold or indifferent to the people around you. You become steady. And the people in your life will feel that shift, not through your words, but through the quiet, grounded way you stand still while opinions and judgments crash around you, without needing to fight back or defend every corner of your life. Go back to the question this all started with. Are you actually living your own life, or are you living the report you keep writing to justify it to everyone watching? One version is lived, the other is performed. Next time you're about to explain a decision that was never anyone's business but your own, pause, take a single breath, and let your actions be the only answer you ever need to give. No footnotes, no disclaimers, no preemptive defense against imagined criticism. That's not arrogance, that's composure. And composure, in the end, the kind Marcus Aurelius practiced in a palace, the kind Epictetus practiced in chains, the kind Cato practiced in a public square full of mockery, is the highest form of freedom a person can ever reach.